To the LOCIEN 8th Annual State of the Latino Community Address. Our theme this year, creating a new frame for racial, social, and economic justice in a time of COVID. But before I begin, let me share that I am in the back room of Mary's Pizza, where LOCIEN began in October of 2009 to discuss sensitive and concerning experiences that we all Latinos have lived. This evening, those issues, concerns are no longer to be in the back room. We are having these very sensitive but real conversations with all of our community this evening. As you will see with tonight's great keynote speakers and panel, I thank them for coming to the table to have that conversation. With all of us, it is truly a humbling moment and an honor to have you all join us this evening for such an important and ongoing community conversation about equity, movement building, and the need for diversity and growth in Latino leadership. Our program this evening is presented by LOCIEN Sonoma County and our following premier partners: Redwood Credit Union, Kaiser Permanente, Community Foundation of Sonoma County, Luther Burbank Center of the Arts, Petaluma Health Center, County of Sonoma, and the Press Democrat. Thank you all for your continued support in allowing LOCIEN to continue to be a connector and a bridge builder and to bring our community together for sensitive conversations, closing the many gaps that prevent equitable change. Yes, change is not easy to accomplish. Without our premier partners and the many virtual padrinos and sponsors and their continued support, this event could never happen. Te mando un abrazo and a heartfelt gracias. As I continue my gracias to our LOCIEN familia, I want you all to know you're all nuestro familia. Todos are at the table, todos are in the conversation, y todos, all of you, make that difference on how equity will flow throughout our communities. But we need you to be sincere and committed in making these changes. During these challenging times, LOCIEN has had to adjust. And LOCIEN continues to adjust to deliver our programs and messages of importance. In March 2022, the live LOCIEN luncheon programs will return. With the addition of hybrid programs with live gatherings in our new home for LOCIEN, the Luther Burbank Center for the Arts. We also have a new meeting date, and we'll be excited to see our LOCIEN familia on Mondays going forward. With LoCien entering its second year of virtual programming, we needed to invest and work harder to bring you, the LoCien Familia, a stronger presentation of our amazing programs in a virtual format. I am proud to introduce this evening the team that worked along with the LoCien Program Committee to bring you our outstanding programs. Ricardo Ibarra, a Wetzel Lab, who produced our virtual program by transmitting via Facebook and Zoom. A gracias to Betsy Chavez, who translated. Partnered with KBBF 89.1 FM, striving to go deeper into our Latino community by streaming our programs, which brings us to giving one more loud shout out or grito for the following padrinos and underwriters, including our premier partners as well. Thank you to the Federated Indians of Greater Rancheria, Independent Office of Law Enforcement Auditor, Career Technical Education Foundation, La Tortilla Factory, Healthcare Foundation, Northern Sonoma County, Sonoma County Economic Development Board, After the Fire USA, KBBF 89.1 FM, Comcast, Sonoma Clean Power, Bank of America, AT&T, PG&E, Mary's Pizza Shack, Bango Corporation, Perry Johnson Anderson Miller and Moskowitz Law Firm, SoCo News, and NorCal Public Media. Thank you all so much to our padrinos, underwriters. Your additional support continues to make a major impact for our communities. Just know what will transpire this evening could not have been done without a tremendous State of the Latino Committee. So I would like to thank the whole committee, starting with Lenny Medina and Oscar Chavez for planning and building tonight's conversation and run a show. Dr. Marlene Orozco for being our moderator. Sylvia Limos, Todd Mendoza, and Oscar Pardo for their dedication, support, and passion in organizing this program. Let's give them all a virtual big hand. And a virtual hug, which I really miss giving to all of you. Gracias al equipo, gracias to the team. We all know that a successful organization needs a strong working board of directors, and that board needs to stay strong during these challenging times. Plus, they have to control me and keep me focused. Gracias to all of them. I could have never asked for a better board of directors, which all inspire me. So let me introduce the LoCien Board of Directors that keep LoCien strong. Lisa Carreño, Vice Chair. Sylvia Limos, Secretary. Todd Mendoza, Treasurer. Pam Channer, Lenny Medina, Elliot Enriquez, Hector Delgado, Carrie Frigent, Robin Salser, and Fernando Carrillo. And would also like to introduce our awesome program manager, Monica Avina, who can assist you in becoming a member of LoCien. A great addition to a building and growing LoCien. Ladies and gentlemen, your LoCien Board of Directors, Monica Avina, and let's give them a virtual hand. Thank you so much. From our very humble beginning, we intended for LoCien to be a bridge to the broader community, a place, a platform, and a forum for the whole of our community, to build greater understanding of the challenges faced by Latinos in Sonoma County, and to share our hopes and dreams and aspiration for more inclusive Sonoma County. This idealism and optimism remains to this day. We recognize that this journey is just not a Latino journey. but a shared journey, a struggle with our BIPOC brothers and sisters. And while we celebrate some progress towards this goal, we see from current events that much work, soul searching, and reckoning with the racism past and present in Sonoma County must be dealt with before any meaningful and long-term change can be achieved. The shiny veneer of our community is peeling, and what is underneath is troubling. We are too stubborn in maintaining the status quo and too content in believing that our largely progressive politics means that racism and prejudice have been solved. These notions are blocking the ideas and the aspirations of our more diverse community. It is time for change. It is time for us to stop nibbling at the edges of change, and it is time for us to get real about equity, about creating a Sonoma County that works for all of us. This pandemic, as horrible as it has been, has put things in perspective. Our government and social systems failed us. And as the data shows, people of color paid the ultimate price. Ladies and gentlemen, I can no longer sit by and accept comfortable inaction. I can no longer accept and play along in fear that if I challenge the status quo or speak up, that my career or livelihood will be hurt or undermined. It is time for all of us to speak up and not be afraid. I ask all of you and the organizations you represent to do your part to address racism in Sonoma County and relieve the pain that so many of us have dealt with. I ask you and your organization to commit to rooting out racist structure and practices that get in the way of us becoming a Sonoma County that works for all of us. I close with a quote. At a time comes when silence becomes betrayal. Martin Luther King. I personally ask you to join us. I ask you to be at the table. Nuestra comunidad needs your voices. At this time, I would like to introduce our host for this evening. Oscar Chavez, a good friend, a mentor, a Latino community leader with heart and passion, who has not stopped in giving back to his community. He is currently the Assistant Director of Human Services for Sonoma County, former Executive Director of Community Action Partnership, Sonoma County, and also serves as Director of the California Forward, Chairman of the Community Development Commission, and the Board Chair for Latino Service Providers, and much more. Oscar's wife, Christine, and their sons live in Windsor. We thank the Chavez family for allowing Oscar to give us so much of himself to the community. Muchísimas gracias. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I present Oscar Chavez, and may you enjoy this evening's program. God bless you.
Thank you, Herman, for that kind introduction and for really setting the stage for what we are going to be discussing tonight. Before we get started, I want to do just a bit of housekeeping and let you know that we do have interpretation available this evening. Betsy Chavez will be our interpreter. Así que si necesita interpretación, pueda empujar aquí al botoncito, al globito, para poder escuchar esta presentación en español a este momento. And for our speakers, because we do have interpretation services, please speak slowly. And we are taking some Q&A, and we do have the Q&A feature. So if you have a question or a comment, please put it there, and we'll try to get to it as we have time. So again, thank you, Herman, and good evening, and welcome to the 8th Annual State of the Latino Community. As Herman mentioned, my name is Oscar Chavez, and I wear many hats in the community, including the Assistant Director for the Human Services Department. And tonight I will serve as your moderator and one of the presenters. The theme for tonight's program is about reimagining and building a strong, equitable, and resilient Sonoma County as we begin to emerge from the devastating impacts of the pandemic that we will talk about today. We gather tonight to share some powerful data and insights for a path forward and an inspiring message to unite our community against forces and structures that are working against our collective well-being. I want to first introduce a video and message from our California State Senator, Alex Padilla, who in December of last year was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to finish the term of Vice President Kamala Harris. Ricardo, can you show the video, please?
Alex Padilla, and I have the honor of representing California in the United States Senate, and I'm so proud to be the first Latino to do so. I want to congratulate Los 100 on the launch of this year's report on the state of the Latino community in the North Bay area. Tracking measurable data will help us better identify and solve challenges facing our community. In the past 2 years, wildfires and the COVID-19 pandemic have exposed and exacerbated so many underlying inequities. The pandemic hit especially hard in the Latino communities, and that disproportionate impact really is no coincidence. Latinos make up half of all frontline workers in California. So as we work to build a just and inclusive recovery, this report can provide a roadmap. We must come together to support a better future for all, and this report shows us how. After hearing stories from families across California, I was proud to champion the American Rescue Plan, which supported COVID treatment, testing, and vaccination across our state. And I pushed to address inequities in delivering these critical resources. I also fought to bring billions of dollars to California in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, funding for transportation, broadband, wildfire prevention, water resiliency, and more. And I'm committed to building back better for all communities. I want to thank all the members of Los 100 for your work to improve the lives of Latinos in the North Bay area. The work you're doing is timely and critical. It will help improve access to healthcare, quality education, and better paying jobs for Latino families, and that is good for everybody. As your senator, I look forward to keeping up the fight for justice, and I thank you for your partnership in that fight.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. He's a friend of Los 100 and a past presenter. Now I have the honor of introducing and welcoming our 5th District Supervisor and Chair of the County Board of Supervisors, Linda Hopkins, who will share a little bit about what the county is doing to address some of the issues related to the pandemic and what we are doing to place equity at the center of our decision-making. Welcome, Supervisor. So great to have you here this evening.
Thank you so much, Oscar, and I really appreciate the invitation. And I want to thank you for your leadership and all the different hats that you wear. But I want to start off on a really real note. Our county family has just lost not just one, but 2 phenomenal Black leaders. One is leaving the county and the other simply isn't coming. And we as the Board of Supervisors have to acknowledge that anti-Black racism lies at the heart of these losses. We are doing work inside county government with the goal of lifting up and supporting employees of color and leaders of color. But I'm here to say that it's not enough. Because even if we have the absolute best work environment inside county government, our employees and leaders of color and their family members still go out into the community. After all, this is public service. And in the community, in public meetings, in private meetings with constituents, they face down not only microaggressions, but also outright racist attacks. This is unacceptable. We've got to do better, Sonoma County. We need to change our culture. We need to become a place where BIPOC residents and leaders feel safe, supported, and loved. At the county, we are deeply committed to that work. We pledge to work internally as well as externally to better support our BIPOC employees and residents. And speaking of lifting up BIPOC residents, I want to thank and commend LOCN for their long-standing ongoing commitment to anti-racist empowering work. It's wonderful to be here this evening and to think about all of the things that have been accomplished through this community work over the past few years. Now I want to transition to a more formal county update. You're about to hear a preview of the Portrait of Sonoma County 2021 update. This report is called an update because this is a follow-up to the Portrait of Sonoma County that was originally published in 2014. This report measures well-being in our county based on health, education, and income data by gender, race, ethnicity, and location. It will offer an in-depth look at life in Sonoma County and highlight areas where we're succeeding as a community, as well as areas in which we can improve. It will show that our county has made some progress in well-being since 2014. In response to that, I'm going to say, without equity, there's no such thing as progress. The results of this report are clear. The overall well-being of Sonoma County is above the state and national average, which is good news. As a whole, we live longer, we earn more money, and we enroll in school and earn college degrees at higher rates than the rest of California and America. But this progress, fortunately, is not uniform. The results reveal growing disparities across gender, racial groups, ethnic groups, and individual communities within the county, and that's what we need to focus on. This is not going to be a report that's just going to sit on the shelf. Instead, it will help inform the way that government and nonprofits respond to the problems that face our community. By understanding how our community is changing and who is being left behind, this data will help us make targeted investments to improve the health and well-being of our entire community. Let's talk a little bit about progress without equity. Progress without equity is not really progress at all. It's regression. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, we have seen progress without equity. Even during COVID, when communities of color were experiencing devastating impacts, the rich were getting richer. Kind of made it seem like things were getting better for everyone, but it simply wasn't. Affluent Californians were able to protect themselves against COVID better than the people who went to work every day in public settings, like our grocery stores and our senior care facilities. Our essential frontline workers got sick. Our non-essential frontline workers were laid off, and they struggled financially to keep themselves and their families afloat. I think all of us gathered here today know that systems and institutions in our county have historically overlooked and excluded Latinx, Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. We know all too well that the people in our community who are the furthest away from opportunities were those who were the hardest hit by the pandemic and our other disasters in recent years. The Portrait of Sonoma County will actually quantify how these inequities continue to directly impact certain communities, exposing the gap that we see in equity and well-being. There is some good news on the way. The infusion of the Federal American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, funds into Sonoma County will definitely contribute to a robust recovery from the pandemic. We also have to pursue a more equitable recovery. I'm here to say that if we don't spend those funds in direct support of equity, we are wasting that money, period. Sonoma County is receiving a direct allocation of $96 million. The first half of those funds were received this year, while the second half will be received in 2022. With the help of our ARPA community work group, we have been receiving community feedback on how best to allocate the funds to equitably address the challenges our residents have been facing and continue to face as a result of the pandemic. The portrait offers a historic opportunity to target those investments in our community where they are most needed and where the potential for transformation is the greatest. Speaking of transformation, we need your help to transform. Please join us. Too often, we leaders develop solutions in isolation. The portrait gives us the opportunity to ensure that those most impacted by systemic inequity, bias, and discrimination are actually involved in creating the solutions to the problems. One way we're going to do this is by co-developing an agenda for action in partnership with the community in response to the portrait's findings. Early next year, we'll be inviting you and others across our community to evaluate the data in the portrait and to develop solutions to address the multiple and often interlocking disadvantages faced by families who are falling behind. This approach very much aligns with the racial equity and social justice pillar of the County of Sonoma's strategic plan. But we have to know that this work belongs to all of us to do together. You know, I could go and try to paint a very rosy picture tonight and spend a bunch of time talking about the fact that we created the Office of Equity. We have made progress in Spanish language communications and translation services inside county government. I could talk about the work we've been doing in upstream investments, the fact that racial equity was a top priority in our COVID response, and that it's one of the pillars of our strategic plan. But here's the thing, while we have made progress, it's not anywhere close to enough. So this is the message that I really want to leave you with. So much more work, is still to be done. We have a severe shortage of affordable housing. Too many people face economic insecurity, and the brunt of the pain from the pandemic and our shifting economy has fallen directly on communities of color. The Board of Supervisors and I are committed to creating a county where every person, including and most especially our Latinx and broader BIPOC community, is safe and healthy and equipped with the tools that they need to create and live lives of value and opportunity. We need to build upon our many strengths as a community, including our diversity. But the only way that we can do that is to acknowledge the real gaps in opportunity that exist today and to work together to close them. The data in the upcoming Portrait of Sonoma County update is going to show the magnitude of those gaps. The next steps, though, are going to be much harder. We need to identify solutions, build consensus around them, and then actually implement them. We need your help in all of those areas. We want your input, we want your creativity, we want your energy. I look forward to working together as equal partners in our mutual quest to improve the well-being of the county we love. Thank you so much for having me here tonight, and back to you, Oscar.
Thank you so much, Supervisor, for your candor and for helping to ground all of us in the important work we have before us. This is a significant moment as our community is preparing to rebuild with new resources. We have important choices to make together, and I look forward to engaging with our colleagues here at Locien and in our audience to begin dialogue about the future. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, a friend to Locien and a previous presenter, Dr. Manuel Pastor. Dr. Pastor is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity at the University of Southern California. He currently directs the Equity Research Institute at USC. Dr. Pastor holds an economics PhD from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and is the inaugural holder of the Turpingian Chair in Civil Society and Social Change at USC. He's written a lot of books around how we can, on issues of the economy, environment, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities. And with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Manuel Pastor. Welcome.
Thank you, Oscar. So good to be with you. And I want to also thank Linda Hopkins for her words. I feel like she gave about half my speech. So thanks for setting me up. And I'm going to go ahead and be showing a PowerPoint. So let me start a screen share and then launch a PowerPoint. And hopefully everybody can see that. Oscar, can you verify?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, perfect. Well, really good to be with you tonight. And what I'm going to try to do in the time that we have together is to talk a little bit about this transformational moment we're in. The supervisor just spoke about the dollars that are being delivered and the ways in which making sure that they forward equity could be super central to really guaranteeing widespread prosperity for the county and for the state of California. And I want to point out that it's not just this moment of an infusion of dollars. There's also a very important thing going on in terms of some fundamental realizations of our connections to one another and also of the fundamental inequalities that plague us as a society. COVID has delivered a real shock to the system. And of course, it's been a public health shock, but it's also been a shock in terms of recognizing the inequalities that have been extant, existing in our society. In many ways, COVID is the disease that revealed our illnesses. What you are looking at right now is the chart showing how Black people have died at 1.4 times the rate of white people. But the other part of this is if you age adjust for the fact that Black populations and Latino populations are younger, and you look at the age adjusted COVID death rates in, for example, LA County, for Latinos, those age adjusted COVID death rates were 3 times what they were for non-Hispanic whites. For Black Angelenos, 2 times what they were for non-Hispanic whites. And if you look at the Pacific Islander community, even more affected. COVID is the disease that revealed our illnesses. It revealed our existing inequalities in terms of access to healthcare. It revealed the racial wealth gap and the fact that Black and Latino, other BIPOC communities had fewer accesses to the sort of safety net or safety cushion that wealth brings. It revealed who was doing essential work. We found out that it wasn't a high-paid manager of a hedge fund, but instead it was agricultural workers, truck drivers, grocery store clerks, healthcare workers, all of whom were far more likely to be people of color. And it also revealed to us very clearly who was on the wrong side of the digital divide. What happened when schools shut down and kids went home and didn't have access to high-speed internet and computers to be able to stay connected to education. So it's been a wake-up call about fundamental inequalities. At the same time, COVID is the disease that illustrated our mutuality, our need to depend on one another. And we saw it in the way in which people stepped up to staff soup kitchens. We saw it in the way in which communities created their own mutual aid societies. We saw it in the ways in which some people began to wear masks, not just to protect themselves, but to protect other people in the community. Just as COVID revealed our mutuality, it also revealed our divisions. It revealed the way in which masks became a political punching bag, in the way in which we saw at the same time that we were dealing with COVID, the way in which we also needed to deal with racist policing and how we began to, many of us knew this for a while, but others began to realize that racist policing was just the tip of a racist iceberg in terms of access to economic opportunity, educational opportunity, and even environmental quality. And so we have found ourselves in a moment of change and reckoning, a change and reckoning with our past, with our present, and certainly with our future. And we've begun to understand that just as we have seen disparities by race, we're seeing disparities by age and geography and place in the economy. And that we are in a moment of fundamental disruption, because it's not just COVID that has lifted the veil on racial inequality, lifted the veil on social vulnerability. We also saw the murder of George Floyd and the ways in which people began to understand the depth of structural racism. This came on top of 4 years of the Trump administration fanning the flames of division, fanning the fears that come and feed into xenophobia, fanning the elements of polarization and social division. And in this moment of disruption, some see disorder and worry about a world slipping away. They see the calls to stop racism as a threat to the tranquility of learning about American history without having to deal with the dark side of genocide and slavery and Jim Crow. But while some see disorder and worry about a world slipping away, others see the possibility of a world transforming and a world that could be born, a world in which we understand the past, and we accept that we need to build a different future, and we understand the immediacy of the current moment in addressing it. So I think we are in a moment of fundamental transformation, a moment in which there is no going back to a normal that had so many communities left behind and kept behind. We see communities of color not wanting to go back. We see young people not wanting to go back. And if you think about the moment we're in terms of the economy, in which so much of the business press is talking about what they call the Great Resignation, that is, people not wanting to go back to work for low wages and jobs where they might face unstable hours and disrespect, and wanting to demand more. Business press talking about the very high quit rates in which people are walking away from jobs and asking for more. You might call that the Great Resignation, but only from an employer perspective. From the perspective of workers and ordinary people, it's a great awakening. It's a great awakening about what is work, what does it mean in our lives, and how do we want to be treated at work. It's a great rebellion about the kinds of conditions that people have faced, and it's potentially a great recalibration about the importance of inclusion, the role of equity, and the role of government, as the good supervisor was speaking to. So why is this happening now? Why is this moment so open for change? I would suggest that we've been building toward this moment for a very long time. We have been seeing in America transform demographically. It has headed the United States to becoming a majority people of color country, probably by the year 2043, 2044. And that is a change that California already went through in the year 1998. What is interesting is what's driving this change is different than what most people think. When most people begin to think about change taking place demographically, they think that what's driving it is immigration. That's certainly what the debate has been about. It's what Trump tried to make sure that people were worried about. And it's what's being played up right now as we see people on our southern border fleeing climate disaster, fleeing political violence, and trying to think about a new life in a different country. But it's important to realize that the era of mass migration has actually really slowed down. This shows you the share of foreign born and how it changed in the 70s and 80s and 90s in California and in Los Angeles, and also how it's been changing in the US, the green line that's there. You're going to notice something very interesting, which is that California was the first place to experience the big shift in immigration. In the 1970s and in the 1980s, fully half of all immigrants coming into the United States came in through California. Fully a quarter of all immigrants coming into the United States came in through Los Angeles County, where I live. But you're going to notice something very interesting. The share of foreign born in Los Angeles has been falling since the year 2000. California, it's been falling since the year 2010. And in the United States, the rate of growth of the foreign born has actually been flattening. And most demographers are worried not about too many immigrants, but about too few immigrants into the future that could fill the middle of the labor market and work to make sure that the baby boomers who are getting older are replaced by productive workers underneath them. And certainly in places like Sonoma County, so dependent on agricultural labor, the need for migrant labor remains high. But in fact, immigration into the United States is slowing down. So what's driving that demographic change? What's driving that demographic change is children. This shows you the change in the state of California by race and ethnicity in the youth population. Between 2000 and 2018, the number of young Californians, those under the age of 18 who were white, actually fell by nearly 1 million. Now, I always like to reassure audiences that does not mean that 1 million young white people died. We would have noticed that. But what it does mean is that there's more young white folks moving into 19 and 20 than moving into 0 and 1. That is, they're graduating from being young people into being young adults, and less young whites are being born. So where's the growth coming? There's been a slight decline in the number of young Black Californians, although some of that is folks redesignating themselves as mixed. And all of the growth in young people is coming from the Latino population and the AAPI population. So demographic change, not so much driven by immigrants as being driven by the young. And you can see this also when you look at Sonoma County. Sonoma County actually, unusually for most of California, continued to add white people in the 1980s and in the 1990s. For California as a whole, the share of whites, young or old, was actually on the decline in the 1990s. But you can see that in the period 2000 to 2050, Sonoma County has become a lot more like California, which is that the growth in the population is being driven entirely by people of color, and in this case, particularly Latinos. And there's been a decline in the number of non-Hispanic whites. Share of foreign born, you might be getting some protests in Sonoma County about how many immigrants there are, but you're actually lagging pretty far behind the state of California and just barely above the United States as a whole in terms of the share of the population that's foreign born. However, there has been growth in the Latino population. This shows you in 1990 where folks lived in Sonoma County. Here, the dots represent 100 people. The gray dots, non-Hispanic white. The sort of orange dots, or gold, I like to think, because of course it's the Golden State, represent Latinos. And you could see here a smattering of green dots representing the Black population, and the sort of red dots representing Asian Pacific Islanders, where there are concentrated, but there's very few concentrations of those populations. In 1990, lots of concentrations of white folks. When you look to the current period, 2015 to 2019, you can see where, and I'll do that again, there's been growing concentrations of Latino population, immigrants, US born, excuse me, and young people. What does that mean for Sonoma County? Going forward, demographic change in Sonoma County is a little bit slower than in California, but it's on par to be much like California, like the United States, becoming majority people of color around 2043, 2044. But the really significant thing about the age of about the demographics of Sonoma County have to do with the age structure of the population. This is a chart I deeply like. It's the median age by race and ethnicity. Here, looking at the United States and in California, and you'll see that the median age, half older, half younger, of whites in the United States, about 44 years old. The median age of whites in the state of California, slightly older. Look way over to the median age of Latinos, 29. 44 or 46 compared to 29, that's 15 years or 17 years. It's a generation gap. And you've got an older white population not looking at a younger population and seeing itself in that younger population. And that racial generation gap has consequences. In research we've done, we found that where the racial generation gap is bigger, the spending on education per student is lower. When older folks are not seeing themselves in younger folks, less willing to make the investments that are necessary in the future. and worrisome for Sonoma County, look at that racial generation gap, and now look at Sonoma County. It's far more extreme. The median age for white folks in Sonoma, 51 years old. The median age for Latinos in Sonoma County, 29 years old. You have a lot of older baby boomers and white, elderly, senior white folks who need to think about the connection that must be made to make the investments for a younger population to be able to succeed. This is especially the case in Sonoma County because of the deep racial disparities. This shows you the share of full-time workers making less than $15 an hour in Sonoma County in today's dollars in both 1990 and 2019. I want you to notice something really interesting here. And by the way, I'm only looking at whites and Latinos here because those are the two biggest populations, and they're the ones where we've got reliable statistics. So what you can see looking at this is that the share of white men making less than $15 an hour actually grew slightly between 1990 and 2019. The share of white females making less than $15 fell slightly. But what's really important here is the big gap between Latinos, both men and women, and their white counterparts, and the fact that that actually went up quite dramatically between 1990 and 2019. With all of our expectations about racial progress and how it should be made, we've instead seen racial retrogression in Sonoma County. Now, it's easy when you look at that to think all of that must be due to education. And part of it is. You can see here that about 40% of white adults between 25 and 64 in Sonoma County have a BA or better versus only 13% of Latino working age adults. On the other hand, 35% of Latino working age adults have less than a high school degree compared to only 4% of whites in Sonoma County. So education is an important part of the story. And of course, as an educator, I would stress it's a very important part of the story because I want you to educate your kids and send them to the University of Southern California. But the bad news is that there's racial disparity even if you control for education. Let's focus in here on those with a high school degree and no college degree. You could see big disparities between whites and Latinos. You could see big disparities that persist for those with some college and even big disparities for those with a BA. So we've got challenges that can be addressed through addressing educational disparities, but we also need to face head on the racial gaps that exist even when we try to address education. So what does all this mean? Recently, we've been trying to address this by changing the narrative and developing a different way of telling our story to motivate people to be able to do something about the racial and class gaps that exist. And it's about creating a new narrative that we call solidarity economics. We've written a book about it, Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter. Writing a book is a great thing. One of the frustrating things, and it's wonderful to see it eventually between covers available for people to buy, download, and read. One of the frustrating things about writing a book is that at the end you realize that you probably could have said it in just 3 sentences. And let me save you a little bit of time. These are the 3 sentences. The first is that we should always talk about our economy and not the economy. The economy is not a set of laws given by God or nature. The market isn't natural. It's something we create rules for. It's something we have institutions that structure. It's something that is given to us by the constellation of power as well. And so we need to talk about our economy and not the economy, because when we say our economy, it becomes an economy that we can do something about. The second thing is that we need to recognize that mutuality drives our economy. When you think about the businesses that actually do best, they are the businesses that treat their customers right, treat their workers right, and treat their suppliers right. And because of that commitment to mutuality, solidarity with their customers, workers, and suppliers, they are able to do better over time. And in a previous book, we've looked at what drives the ability to sustain employment growth at a metropolitan level over time. And we found that those metropolitan areas that are more equal, that have less racial segregation, that are less fragmented and socially polarized, are actually able to generate more prosperity over time. And this is a finding that's also been found by research from the Federal Reserve and from the International Monetary Fund when they look at a country level. Why is this important? So many of you in the audience argue for equity. And I think arguing for equity is important morally. Arguing for inclusion is important because it is about decency and the breadth of the human family. But it's important to realize that equity is actually also good for economic performance. When we over incarcerate and over police, we're leaving people's talent that can't be used to generate economic growth because they're either locked in prison or marked with records that make it difficult for them to get jobs and contribute. When we have a racial wealth gap, that means that families find it hard to invest in the education of their kids, find that they cannot afford a house and accumulate stability over time, find that they cannot start a business because they don't have sufficient wealth. We are losing the talent of those young people. We're losing the entrepreneurship of those small businesses. We are losing this neighborhood stability that comes from home ownership. Equity is a superior growth model, and we need to own that argument. Finally, we need to realize that even though equity might contribute to our overall prosperity, some people do benefit from the current state of affairs. And because of that, social movements will be necessary to generate change. One of the expressions I have is that equity comes to the table kicking and screaming and protesting. And so if you're expecting the conversation around racial equity to always be polite and civil, you have forgotten that the way that the minimum wage goes up is when people protest. The way that rents get stabilized is when people protest. The way that attention gets paid to issues of the unhoused is when uncomfortable conversations take place. So let me leave you with these final thoughts. It is important to realize the moment we are in. I don't think that we are in a world right now of incremental change. I think we're in a world in which the stakes in terms of transformation are as large as they were during the Great Depression, as the landscape is as unsettled as it was during the Civil Rights Movement. The risks of moving in one direction or another are as high as they were when we moved in the direction of Reaganomics, Thatcherism, and neoliberal economics. So it is important to monitor what we do with the ARPA dollars, but it's important to understand that the stakes are extraordinarily large. We are about right now recalibrating our understanding of what is the economy for, recalibrating our understanding of how much we center equity, recalibrating our understanding of the role of government in the economy. So yes, we need to work on focusing our new investments in communities that have been left behind and kept behind. We need to disaggregate data and develop equity metrics for accountability. And that's why I'm so happy that the Portrait of Sonoma County is about to be unveiled to you. It's also useful to look at other data tools that we've been a part of helping develop, like the National Equity Atlas, which produced a lot of the data I've used tonight, or the California Immigrant Data Portal, which looks specifically at the situation of immigrants and also lifts up data on the situation of undocumented Californians who are a very big presence in Sonoma County as well as in the rest of the state. So we need data tools, but most of all, we need to understand the commitment and courage that Lo Cien is calling on you to exhibit. There is a famous quote that's attributed to Martin Luther King. He said it, but it's true that he actually was borrowing it from someone else. And that famous quote is that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But Martin Luther King meant, and we should always repeat when we use that quotation, that yes, the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends toward justice, but it's we who need to do the bending. We who need to step up with courage, conviction, and the commitment to community building to bend that arc toward justice. So it's a call to action. And if you want to read a little bit more about it, these are a few books. State of Resistance, which looks at that call in the context of California, and my newest book, Solidarity Economics, which includes a lot of the insights shared tonight. With that, let me stop the share and turn things back over to Oscar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pastor, for your presentation and your words of wisdom, and for all of the incredible work that you have done to bring us the important equity metrics so that we in our communities can use to drive the change that is necessary to make sure that more people can achieve not only an equitable recovery during the pandemic, but that have the opportunity to live their full potential. We did have a question in the Q&A related to the labor shortage and our housing challenges and the growing gas prices and what we might be able to do about that.
Oops. Sorry for the technical snafu there. So I think that the important thing to do is both to realize something and then to do something. The realization, I think, is that this labor shortage is in part a reflection of a shortage of good jobs. You know, what's interesting is we are 4 million jobs nationally under where we were before the pandemic started. We would not usually predict in the context of such a job shortfall that people would be so reluctant to return to work. They are reluctant to return to work because after the pandemic caused them to question what is life all about. Part of what life is all about is having work that is meaningful, having work that is respected with pay, decent working conditions, and good attitudes. And it's also about trying to find meaning in that work going forward. And so I see a lot of people really trying to do that. So I think we need to think about this moment as being very fundamental. And I also think in terms of the actions that we need to take, part of it is that wages are going to go up. And we're in particular going to have to help our small employers deal with that moving forward, because that's the work that's there. And they're going to be competing with forward-looking companies like Amazon, who've recognized that's what they need to do in this current moment. The other thing is that we do need to realize that this inflation that we're in is really disrupting folks. A lot of it is temporary, to tell you the truth. I'm trained as an economist, and this supply chain breakdown is absolutely real. Some of it is a lot of excess money that's been put into the system, in particular because a lot of people who got the stimulus checks were able to save them, and now they're spending just as the holidays approach. And also, there's been a real shift. This is a little bit technical. We used to spend a lot of money on services. Now we spend a lot of money on goods, and that's driving up costs as well. So I'll just say one last thing before jumping off. I probably should have said it at the beginning, that I do have a voice condition, which is what causes my voice to be harsh and break. It's not just being emotional, although every chance I have an opportunity to be with Oscar and talk about these issues does make me emotional. So if you're wondering about my voice along the way, it's really just that. But I'm so glad to have been a part of this. I realized I was part of Los 100 in 2007, a couple of years before the pandemic. I'm glad to be here in 2021. I'm looking forward to being with you in 2025, when you will be able to boast to me that you took my talk seriously, you took Dr. Orozco's challenge seriously, and you began to, along with good folks like Linda Hopkins, seriously move the needle on racial equity.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pastor. We appreciate the time that you're able to be with us tonight, and thank you for those words of inspiration and wisdom again. So thank you. I wish you were here and we were here in public to give you a big round of applause, but so appreciate you being with us tonight. So thank you again.
Gracias.
And now I'm going to share my screen and give you an update on the portrait of Sonoma. And I just want to get confirmation that you guys can see this. Let me actually do it a different way here. Okay. So I've had the pleasure of working in partnership with many people on this call tonight, and I believe many of us share a passion for Sonoma County. I thank all of you for making the time this evening to come together and further reflect on the state of our community and our need for action. Many of you will agree with me that we are in a new place of understanding what leads to opportunity and well-being. After the losses we suffered during COVID, it has also become painfully clear that we've made parts of our community much more vulnerable to suffering. For the next couple of minutes, I'm going to walk you through a portrait or snapshot of some data that gives us clues about our community, where our community was heading prior to COVID. Then we'll take pause to acknowledge some of the hurts and harms our community members faced. And finally, we'll conclude with a request for you to join us in creating a new, healthier Sonoma County. So the portrait of Sonoma County is a snapshot or point in time that gives us some understanding of our community's well-being. Well-being is a very complex idea to measure, but it can be helpful to use some data and tools to try and demystify some of its complexity. While traditional data collection processes are just that, traditional, and can't result in erasure of community members who already experience marginalization, here we combine the power of quantitative data with the power of qualitative data to clarify this complex idea and to give us a way to talk about, understand, and act on the disparity that plagues not only our community, but many others. In 2014, Sonoma County hired the Measure of America to create a lengthy report called A Portrait of Sonoma County. This report contained information about some of the groups who live in Sonoma County and gave us simple measure of well-being through the tool called the Human Development Index. This index helped us make comparisons across place, race, and gender in Sonoma County. It was the first report of its kind in our community. And we've heard from many of you that you use this report as your almanac on Sonoma County. However, developing the portrait was much more than just a report building project. We paired the report with a campaign focused on creating a new understanding of the conditions that lead to health in our community. Many of you also engaged in efforts to put into action changes that reflect a growing recognition that opportunities and resources were not evenly distributed in our community. Now, 7 years later, we have not only updated the report from 2014, but we have brought a critical equity lens to our efforts and have created a new space to co-create with you an agenda for action in our community. Let's explore that 2021 portrait update a little further by acknowledging the shared effort it took to produce this update. We've been so fortunate to work with a diverse group of stakeholders and organizations who are concerned with not only monitoring our community well-being, but ensuring that we share the sense of well-being throughout our county. Together, we are able to leverage each other's work and resources to print an update to the report and to launch an engagement campaign. By the end of this presentation, I hope that you will feel inspired to join us. The key tool feature in the portrait is a measure called the Human Development Index. This index recognizes that while many factors shape a person's health and opportunity, represented in the sunburst around the person in this picture, there are three particular elements that may be most fundamental: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living. Health, knowledge, and income can be measured in many different ways, but the measure of America combines just 4 statistics to calculate the Human Development Index. The statistics that use are widely available at the census tract, county, state, and national level, which means that we can calculate the Human Development Index for communities of many sizes. This data is also available by some gender identities and for some racial groups so that we can see how Human Development Index scores might vary between groups in our community. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we acknowledge that these indices can obscure the realities for people who already experience institutional and structural marginalization and invisibility. And we'll address how we work to address those gaps in a few slides. As we compare well-being and access to opportunities across groups and geographies, we see great disparities. Once disparities in these basic outcomes are brought into the light, the next task is to examine the underlying causes and policy choices that have led to them by exploring a whole host of other indicators. When we wanted to determine what other indicator data could help us better understand how human development varies across groups and places, we asked our community members to tell us where to look. We heard deep concerns expressing a need for more data about specific populations, such as people who are undocumented, or other groups who experience invisibility. We also heard concerns about safety in sharing that kind of information with institutions that have traditionally marginalized these same community members. And we heard how important for us it was to humanize our data collection, to be very clear that we want to know these things so that we can better design and include these community members, and to interrupt the institutional and structural harm that they have experienced in the past. We heard very thoughtful requests to look at how housing impacts local well-being as well. We heard a repeated cry for a closer examination of the mental health of our community, clearly an area where our community well-being has been challenged by years of disasters and pandemic conditions. The 2021 update will include data about all of our census tracts, a look at racial and gender differences, and supplemental data to give us more context about what is needed to improve well-being. So what does the data suggest? The data for 2021, the update suggests, what does the data suggest about well-being? This report relies largely on data from 2019 or earlier. So what it shows us are some hints about local conditions before the pandemic. This information is still relevant today as it gives us a second point in time to compare to the 2014 Portrait Report. In this way, we can see how things might have been moving in our community. It can also help us to once again give ourselves a picture of how things continue to vary between places, some racial groups, and some genders. Please allow me to show you just a few key points. My goal is to inspire you to want to read the full report, and more importantly, to engage in dialogue with you about how we can use this information to act differently as we thankfully work together to rebuild our community. To begin, let's consider the average well-being of Sonoma County as it compares to California and the US. This chart shows that according to the HDI measure, Sonoma County has a higher level of well-being than the state or the nation. When we compare Sonoma to other larger communities within California, we also see that Sonoma's average well-being score is very high compared to other counties. In fact, Sonoma County is the fourth highest scoring metro area in the state. But let's stop looking at just the aggregate measure of well-being. Again, this average obscures differences by race, place, and some gender identities. As we look deeper, we see there is great variation in well-being, most strikingly around race and ethnicity. Many of you will remember seeing a similar image from our 2014 campaign. Here we show the highest scoring and lowest scoring census tracts in Sonoma County. East Bennett Valley is at the top, while Roseland has the lowest well-being score. In 2014, we explored these differences and found that the two places featured very different resources and opportunities. In this way, we can see that place matters. Where you live impacts your reality, your access to resources, and your outcomes. This geography focus highlights opportunities for us to powerfully and meaningfully reallocate resources and form new healing structures to achieve equitable outcomes. The portrait also helps us look broadly at how well-being varies across some racial groups. Here we see that between 2014 and 2021 reports, human development declined for some of our beloved community members, with the Black community experiencing the largest decline. For others, like Latinos, we see that the human development increased. We also note the differences between groups is very stable across time periods. And in both years, we see a marked difference in the experience by racial groups. We need to ask ourselves, what are the conditions in our community ecosystem that led to these varied experiences? What can we do to change conditions so that all people can enjoy high well-being in our community? Finally, the portrait gives us a picture of how well-being differs between those who identify as male and those who identify as female. Here we see there are differences in human development between these two genders. This information is also useful in that it shows us more evidence that social structures lead to reduced outcomes for specific groups, like those who identify as female. And this binary system of gender, as shown here, begins to shine light on what is missing. There are beautiful members of our community who do not fit into these boxes, and we recognize that we contribute to ongoing harm by relying only on these two options for gender identity. It is equally important to talk about what is not included in the report. Available data results in statistical erasure of certain communities in this report, and there are two issues we want to ensure we raise here. One is that Human Development Index uses available data to calculate concepts like access to knowledge. The data that the Census Bureau currently collects looks at high school attainment or some college. However, there are many other types of knowledge that are not tracked, and not being tracked can be equivalent with not valuable unless we are intentional about highlighting this gap. The HDI does not recognize important sources of knowledge like traditional knowledge, but together we can see that an opportunity to strengthen our data muscle locally. So we want to focus on other ways that we recognize knowledge in our community. The other issue is that the data included in this report does not represent all of the members of our community. That invisibility can result in insignificance, and we commit to working with those communities not reflected in this report to ensure that we challenge the old and worn trope of statistical insignificance. The data in this report comes from the California Health Department and the US Census Bureau, who do not currently track individual level data for all ethnicities or gender identities. They also sample or gather information on some individuals to make assumptions about larger populations. And sometimes they don't gather enough sample data to feel like they can make accurate assumptions about populations. For example, the California Department of Health does not collect enough data about Indigenous people or specific tribes to accurately estimate life expectancy for this group. We see these limitations that do affect the results we share in the portrait. We've added these racial and gender data gaps by ensuring that we understand that their narratives provide data that is as powerful for us to rely on as quantitative or traditional data. As such, you will see interviews with those community members to challenge that statistical insignificance by sharing their stories. We can also continue to urge the data collection agencies to expand their data collection efforts so that reports like this one are even more representative of our true community. At the County of Sonoma, several county departments, including the Office of Equity, will be working together to identify data gaps and to strengthen our efforts to better collect and disaggregate data across our programs. We have already surveyed our community-based organizations to better understand their challenge in data collection and the types of supports they might need to be able to collect and disaggregate data. By now, I hope I've shown you some of the ways the portrait can help us reflect on how well-being varies in our community. There is even more to consider in the full update, and we are going to ensure you all have access to the full report once it becomes available. As Supervisor Hopkins suggested, this report is important. It is important because it gives us a clear map of where preventable disparities exist in our community. It is also important because we can use these data in time studies to hold ourselves accountable. We can use the Human Development Index as a tool to see where more action is needed. And before we end our time together, let's take a moment to look at how this mapping, accountability, and action approach can make a material difference in the lives of community members. Let's go back in our minds and consider where we have the highest and lowest human development scores. Bennett Valley was the highest scoring census tract in both 2014 and 2021 reports. Census tracts in the Roseland area named Roseland Creek scored the lowest in 2014, and Roseland scored the lowest in 2021. But let's consider the ecosystem of health, those features of a community that help it to thrive. The landscapes are markedly different in these two communities. As a community, we have invested in East Bennett Valley. There are parks, children almost always graduate from high school, and people earn high salaries who live in this neighborhood. As a community, we have not invested in the same resources in Roseland. There are limited parks and green spaces. Funding for schools is much lower as it is tied to property values, and earnings are far below the real cost of living in Sonoma County. This disinvestment can be partly explained by the fact that Roseland's community has been the subject of selective annexation, where only the profitable parts of Southwest Santa Rosa were incorporated into the city. Because it was excluded from the city of Santa Rosa for many years, the community did not have the same transportation, retail, or other business structures, or the infrastructure like sidewalks, street lights, or water supply that Santa Rosa residents enjoy. These conditions led to reduced housing values. And let's consider the most glaring statistic on this slide, the racial makeup of the two communities. This disinvestment and selective annexation are examples of what scholars refer to as structural racism. Now I ask you to pause and feel this with me. we have to acknowledge that the harm that we have caused by our uneven attention and action. Let's take a brief moment of silence just to acknowledge this harm. Thank you for pausing with me. It is good for us to use our human muscles, our hearts, to feel the harm many of our community members endure today. It is also important for us to pause so we can gather ourselves for future action. For our last slide with data, I want to show you how meaningful our actions can be. In 2014, Roseland Creek was the lowest scoring census tract, but it has improved. Could this be due to our work to highlight the disparities and advocate for more resources and actions in this community? For example, could this improvement be tied to the 2017 annexation of Roseland Creek into the city of Santa Rosa? How about the tremendous work of community members to improve educational opportunities by building new schools, adding new programs, and creating new partnerships with local colleges and universities? Could the new library, new affordable housing, and new parks slated for the neighborhood contribute to even more improved well-being? What might we learn from Southwest Santa Rosa that can be applied to other places of extreme disinvestment, like the Springs in Sonoma Valley? Our attention to Roseland Creek and our commitment to holding ourselves accountable for the outcomes of this community have resulted in material change to community members. This shows us that our action is meaningful and that we can make change to structural racism. We will find the answers to these questions together. We ask you, will you join us? We believe that communities have the resources to strengthen and to be self-healing. Because we recognize that those closest to the problem are closest to the solutions, as well as furthest from resources and power, we will develop an agenda for action in partnership with disproportionately impacted community members. Only together can we shift resources and power to people who have the solutions that will work for them and develop an agenda for action to drive meaningful policy and programs to unseat structural racism. We hope that you will partner with us when we call on you to help us consider the following questions. What is my personal role and responsibility in understanding the impacts of these inequities and working to undo them? How are we funding COVID-19 and fire recovery in a way that doesn't exacerbate the inequities laid out here? And how can decision makers empower communities in the lowest scoring neighborhoods to make decisions about their own well-being? So we invite the community to help shape what the progress should look like. Our report is slated to be completed or published in January of 2022, where we will engage in a public campaign rooted in community voice. And we invite you to join us in shaping that agenda for action so that together we can create an equitable recovery, and to make sure that when we invite Dr. Pastor back in 2025, that he can see the difference that we're making because we have brought our community together. We've built an understanding of what we do, what we needed to do together, and we took action together. So with that, I want to thank you guys for listening to this portion of the program related to the update of the Portrait of Sonoma. And now, I'd like to invite our next presenter, Dr. Marlene Orozco, who will present the Latino Economic Scorecard for Sonoma County. And she will be joined later by a panel of successful entrepreneurs who, in spite or despite the odds of, despite COVID, have had success in their businesses during the pandemic. But before that, I want to briefly tell you a little bit about Dr. Orozco. She's the lead research analyst at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and CEO of Stratified Insights, a research consulting firm. She holds a PhD and BA in sociology from Stanford and a master's in education policy and management from Harvard. As a mixed methods researcher by training, Dr. Orozco has over 250 hours of in-depth interview experience and quantitative expertise in big data. Welcome, Dr. Orozco, and we look forward to hearing about the Latino Economic Scorecard.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Oscar and Lucien, for this invitation. I have the honor and privilege of driving us home tonight. So you'll want to stay tuned for this very passionate panel of entrepreneurs that we have coming up next. For this last part of programming, my goal really is to drive home 3 themes that we've heard tonight. So the first is I want to share some updates to data. And it's really important to have these updates to better understand the trends of our economy. So in the words of Dr. Manuel Pastor, we need to take ownership and action over some of these trends. And it's important to have updates, multiple data points in time, to track progress. And so we're going to spend some time doing that very briefly. The second theme of tonight's, the rest of tonight's session is I want to hammer home this notion that a focus on equity is not just a social or moral imperative. It is an economic imperative. There is a real power in the economic realm of focusing on equity. So we'll talk through that as well. And then lastly, I want to drive home this point on mutuality, our role in helping and supporting each other as we continue to navigate the ongoing impacts of COVID-19. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And I have the honor of updating you all on the Sonoma County Latino Scorecard. This is the economic edition. And then I'll also talk about some entrepreneurship trends that are specific to Latinos in Sonoma County. More specifically, you may recall on the right-hand side here, the 2019 Sonoma County Latino Scorecard that was released. So I'm going to focus on updating some of those data points for you all, some of which you've already heard tonight. So I'll breeze through some of that. And then secondarily, I'll focus on the economic impact specifically as it relates to Latino business owners. And we'll close out our session with 3 local entrepreneurs. You'll hear from Mercedes Hernandez, who is the founder of Bow and Arrow Clothing and SoCo Marketplace. She's gathered many business owners, and so she'll talk a little bit more about how she's doing that. Juan Hernandez, who is the CEO and founder of Crecer Capital, an emerging CDFI that is deploying microloans to Latino businesses in Sonoma County. And then we'll round out our panel with Ricardo Ibarra, who's the CEO and founder of WhatsApp and has had a critical role in ensuring the flow of all of the digital portions of our programming tonight. So to kick things off, I want to talk about very briefly 6 measures that we're tracking and updating in this scorecard. Now, this is a focus on economic measures. So you'll see here, traditional kind of pathways of upward mobility is through education. So we have some benchmarks around education. Income is a pretty straightforward way to measure, to proxy wealth. But really kind of the traditional pathway of wealth generation in the United States has been through home ownership. But increasingly so, it is being done through business ownership. Secretary Yellen, who's at the Treasury and formerly at the Federal Reserve, really talks about business ownership as one of the building blocks of economic opportunity. So similarly to how one can build a physical asset with home ownership, business ownership allows for that mobility as well. And then perhaps, really unveiled for us throughout the experience of the pandemic, health insurance is really critical. We are, a health crisis is not far removed from an economic one. So we have some measures there around health insurance coverage. And then lastly, I want to talk about this measure, the standardized measure on poverty. And I should note that all of these measures and what I'm going to share today will be shared with you all, viewers in attendance, in really accessible kind of one-page documents. So you can see it shared there on the right-hand side with the measures will be on the back-hand side of that. So let's get into some of the new scorecard measures, specifically on the economic front. The first that I want to share with you all is this Latino entrepreneurship score. And this is a score that we've derived at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. And what this allows us to do is to really standardize a measure for comparative purposes. So you can see here the formula on the right. It's essentially a ratio where we take the number of Latino businesses in a particular region, and we divide that by the population in that region. And all of that ratio is then divided by the non-Latino business rate and population. And so a score of 1 on this Latino entrepreneurship score means that the rate for both groups, in this case, Latinos and non-Latinos, or the white population, is the same. So this shows parity in business ownership, specifically of those businesses that are employer businesses, those that employ at least one person other than the business owner. Now, we released a report in 2018, and we're currently updating that. That's the theme of updating reports here. And in that report, we rank the top metro areas. And in terms of this Latino entrepreneurship score, Miami was ranked number 1. But even then, Miami did not obtain a score of 1, which would equal parity for both groups. Miami's score was 0.59 on this measure. Sacramento, here in California, ranked 9th in terms of the metro areas, and its score was 0.29. Los Angeles had a score of 0.15. And Sonoma County, most recently, has a score of 0.16. This is slightly lower than that of California as a whole, which this entrepreneurship score is at 0.19. So again, what the standardized measure allows us to do is, 2 years from now, or when Dr. Manuel Pastor comes back in 2025, I'll come back as well, and I'll share what the rate is of Latino business ownership. Hopefully it's much greater than 0.16, so that we can measure that growth over time. We also have a poverty threshold that is located on the scorecard. And again, this is another widely leveraged measure, standardized, so you can compare across regions. And this scale is an interesting one. It goes from 0 to 501. And it's a rather complex calculation of family structure and income. A larger value of this poverty measure means that you're further away from poverty. So if your value is 501, your family income is more than 5 times away from the appropriate poverty threshold. And then there you can see a simple calculation. If a person's income is roughly $20,000 a year, and their specific poverty threshold given their family structure is 13,861, then what you would do is divide their income by the poverty threshold, multiply it by 100, and get their value, which is 144. A poverty measure, a poverty value of 100 means that you're right at that poverty line. And of course, there's been other work done by United Way, for instance, that talks about the real cost of living in a particular place. So this poverty threshold was established by the Social Security Administration, and then it was revised in 1980 and is adjusted for inflation. But even then, you can think about how this is a minimum level of poverty here, or kind of like a bare minimum, if you will, because we know that the true value is significantly higher than that. Nonetheless, a standardized way to track progress over time. The poverty status for Sonoma County for Latinos specifically is 277, so that's the value score, 486 for the white population. You can see that Latinos in Sonoma County are faring better in terms of their poverty status relative to Latinos in California as a whole. So that sentiment was echoed with some of the trends in the Portrait of Sonoma. Nonetheless, you can see a wide gap in poverty. So Latinos in Sonoma County are about 1.75 times behind that of their non-Latino counterparts. Now, some of the other measures that are updated on that scorecard, you'll note, again, this has already been talked about, but in terms of education, there has been some growth among those that are Latino adults with a BA degree or higher. It's grown 4 percentage points. It's actually pretty big. It is now 15% of the Latino population in Sonoma County has a BA degree. We also saw that some growth in home ownership. So between 2014 and 2019, home ownership among Latinos has grown 3 percentage points. It's now 41% of the Latino population in Sonoma County are homeowners. I will note, however, that this is slightly lower than Latinos in California as a whole. So Latinos in California as a whole, their share of homeownership is at 45%. And white residents in Sonoma County over-index on homeownership relative to the white population in California. So this means that 68% of the population, the white population in Sonoma County, are homeowners. And this is compared to 62% of the white population within the state of California as a whole. So there's some important gaps there, bifurcated certainly across race. And then there's a new measure that's included. Again, I talked about health insurance. Important to note here that 86% of Latino residents in Sonoma County have some form of health insurance, and this is compared to 97% among white residents. Certainly, we want these numbers to be 100% for all groups. So now I want to move on quickly to talk about some of the entrepreneurship trends that we are uncovering. And again, my work at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative really focuses on this theme of growth, not just certainly in population, the Latino population, but also in business ownership. We've seen some growth as well within Sonoma County. So between a 1 year of 2017 and 2018, or I should say 2 years, 2017 and 2019, self-employment among Latinos in Sonoma County has grown 1 percentage point. So now 8% of the total Latino population identifies as self-employed as their primary means of earning income. And I should note here that business owners remain more highly educated. This holds true for Latino business owners. They're more highly educated than the general Latino population. 25% of Latino business owners in Sonoma County have a four-year college degree, compared to just 13% among those who are wage workers. And that wage worker level of education has actually declined slightly over time, which may be an indication of an influx of lower skilled immigrants coming into Sonoma County for wage work. I do want to note here that Latinas are showing a fast growth in business ownership in Sonoma County, and this parallels larger national trends as well. Between 2017 and 2019, the number of Latina entrepreneurs in Sonoma County grew 4 percentage points. That's a really big jump. So 46% of all Latino-owned businesses now are owned by women. So that's reaching parity. Women make up roughly 50% of the population. It depends on where you look in the world, but Latinas are certainly gaining parity very quickly with their male counterparts. Okay, I will pause here because we're running out of time, and I want to make sure that we get to the panel. So there are on the entrepreneurship trend fact sheet, you'll see some specific data points related to the impact of COVID-19 around business closures, around negative effects broadly. You'll also note kind of a delineation of specific negative impacts, the types of capital that was sought as a way to mitigate the negative impacts of the pandemic. But I also want to end here now on our survey data, really focusing on some bright spots that we should consider. So in conducting focus groups, and you'll certainly hear even from our entrepreneurs today, there are ways in which this group is a persistent theme is optimistic and resilient. So Latino entrepreneurs are adopting technology as a matter of being able to survive the new way of conducting work in the pandemic. There's been a shift to e-commerce, offering of new products and services, oftentimes what we call business pivots. Some Latino business owners are also talking about how the pandemic has allowed them to increase or improve their relationships with local government. So with that, I want to go ahead and stop my share. Again, I assure you that all of the data points that I covered will be available to you on the very brief fact sheets that you can reference. But I want to now introduce my panel of entrepreneurs. So I welcome to the virtual stage our three entrepreneurs who are going to share their stories as it relates to the ways in which they've navigated the pandemic and some of the ways that they've brought community together on this theme of mutuality. So I have here Mercedes Hernandez, again, founder of Bow and Arrow Clothing and SoCo Marketplace. I'm also joined by Juan Hernandez, CEO, founder of Crecer Capital, and Ricardo Ibarra, CEO, founder of WhatsApp. So what I'll do now is I'm going to give each of the entrepreneurs the stage for about a minute or so to share a little bit about their business and who they are. So I'll start with you, Mercedes. We just heard that Latinas are starting businesses at a fast rate, catching up to our male counterparts here. Tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here tonight. So I'm Mercedes Hernandez, the owner of Bow and Arrow Clothing, and I started Bow and Arrow, opened up my first brick and mortar when I was 20 years old. Through the connection with the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I was able to do this. And so I've had my business now for over 5 years. And, you know, this pandemic was definitely challenging for me. It made me, you know, readjust my business model and, you know, went through many challenges, but I'm really grateful that I was able to overcome, and with the help and the support of the community, I wouldn't be able to do that. But also just through this pandemic, I noticed a large emergence of new businesses starting. So many people had time on their hands to really think about what they wanted to do and what they were passionate about. So I noticed a bunch of other millennial-owned businesses in Sonoma County starting businesses of their own, you know, mainly selling through Instagram, maybe through Etsy. And as things started to open up during the pandemic, I wanted to create a community or a marketplace where we could all come together and where I can bring awareness to these new small businesses that were mainly millennial-owned businesses here in Sonoma County. So in September of 2020, I hosted my first outdoor small business market, which I had 11 vendors total to start. And it was just a great opportunity to bring all of us together, and then for the community to come together as well and support these small businesses. And now it's been a little over a year, and we've grown to over 90 vendors at the markets that we host now, both in Cotati and Santa Rosa. And so I'm trying to keep up with the growth of it all. But it's been an awesome thing to be a part of, and definitely a blessing that came out of this pandemic. So I'm really happy to be here tonight with you guys and to share that with you.
Excellent, thank you. And Juan, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Hello, everybody. My name is Juan Hernandez. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Crecer Capital. Crecer Capital is a startup, nonprofit, lending, and investment organization. We are an emerging community development financial institution, otherwise known as a CDFI. Crecer Capital is a strategy for filling the finance gap that we have in the community for our Latino small businesses who do not have currently the access to capital that they need to thrive and grow. Loans have been shown to make a big impact on the success of business owners' trajectory. Not only are we supporting a thriving and local economy, but we are helping people support their families. Crecer Capital is both a means to build wealth in the Latino community. We know that small business development among Latinos is a critical driver for our Sonoma County. We launched this year in 2021. And one of the things that was really helpful for us was the learnings that we did during the 2017 fires. So during the 2017 fires, we also saw the local business owners get hit. And so we took those learnings from the 2017 fires and the learnings from a microloan program that we launched in Sonoma Valley, and we combined it and we launched Crecer Capital for Sonoma County Latino small businesses. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent, thank you, Juan. And then at the tail end here, Ricardo, tell us a little bit about you and your business.
Hola, buenas noches. ¿Cómo están todos? Espero que estén pasándola muy bien. So yes, my name is Ricardo Ibarra, and I'm the director of WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a response to the need of having bilingual communication strategies in Sonoma County. So it was really a call for communication justice here in Sonoma County, having bilingual in agencies and government agencies and nonprofits and local companies. But really, it started with the idea to digitize Latino businesses in Sonoma County, elevate Latino businesses in Sonoma County, so to really put them on the map. Because what I found when I was editor at La Prensa Sonoma is that I found restaurants or places that had a great taco, they had a great salsa, but they were not online. They were not on the map. If you went to Google Maps, you wouldn't find them. They didn't have a Facebook or Instagram or nonetheless a website. So really when I started with this to go full time with it was January of 2020, mostly February, March. So I came up starting with a pandemic. So I shifted my business plan and really did some outreach to different agencies and nonprofits and local companies to really offer our bilingual communication strategies to them. And the idea behind that is really to, what I mentioned, give communication justice to this county through equity. That means having every outreach effort being in Spanish and English. That creates what we've been discussing here throughout this evening, creates more inclusion, it talks to diversity, it gives more transparency, and also it speaks to everyone. And the most important part of this is that it gives the Latino community a sense of belonging, which is very important for every stage of every part of our society and economic, social, and cultural. So yeah, that's what we do.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ricardo. And certainly we know that COVID-19 has posed many challenges for small businesses. 30% of Latino-owned businesses report experiencing temporary closure. Sonoma County businesses are also reporting very large decreases in revenue. And of course, accessing capital has been a persistent challenge prior to the pandemic that was really exacerbated throughout the pandemic. Share with us a little bit about what are some of the specific challenges that you all faced, but importantly, how did you navigate those challenges and what were some solutions that you deployed? So Ricardo, for instance, you talked about businesses broader outside of yours that you support really needed to get on the map, right? So there was this need to have this digital transition. And there's also this need, as Mercedes talked about, of being creative with solutions and navigating outdoor spaces and convening folks in new ways. So tell us a little bit, so the 1-2 punch. So what were a specific challenge that you faced and what is a solution that you sought or imposed? And we'll start with you, Ricardo.
Well, one of the challenges definitely was, as I mentioned, my business model, because I wanted to uplift Latino businesses, but suddenly they were closing everywhere. So I really changed my vision of who was my client and really moved to look for nonprofits, other local companies, probably that were their strategies were all in English. So really help them with their outreach and inreach to do it bilingual, to incorporate Spanish language. And very important that the pandemic created when we were talking about putting businesses on the map is that everyone was indoors. We were all isolated and we were really with our phones. So really what I did was to do that outreach to local businesses and companies and say, hey, you need to be on these phones because this is where people are right now. So really working on rebranding businesses, helping them do their website, their graphic design, their social media, working with music, video, photography, and to really connect them and helping them building an online store or any kind of way that we could to really connect with new clients that they probably didn't know they had. And really, we live in a digital era, and if you're not online, you really don't exist. So that was kind of our solution, to really go out there and tell people like, hey, jump into the internet. This is where it's happening.
Fascinating. That's really interesting, Ricardo, because prior to the pandemic, all research showed that Latinos over-indexed on social media use and smartphone usage, right? So there's this notion, and a very real one, that exists about digital divides, right? Certainly not all, that's not true for all segments. But why not leverage the tools that one uses for communicating with a family member in our home country? Why not leverage it for business marketing and business purposes? So thanks for your efforts there. Mercedes, I want to turn to you now. Tell us a little bit about a challenge that you specifically faced. And again, what was the solution, or how did you go about solving or navigating that?
Yeah, so when the pandemic first took place, I couldn't order any more inventory from my vendors who were from Los Angeles. That was all closed. So I was just stuck with the inventory I had in store. And at the time, I relied heavily on foot traffic. My website, I wasn't up to date. I didn't have all my inventory on there. I had put it on the back burner for a couple of years because I was focusing on my storefront. And so the pandemic really forced me to go completely digital. So I revamped my website, wrote down my marketing plan, and I tried to sell every piece I had left in my shop. I remember just taking a step back when I walked into my shop and just had barely any clothes left on each rack. It was just so surreal. And so making sure that I, adapted to the change in environment and, just overcoming the pandemic and stuff was my main focus. And because of that, I was able to overcome that until, I was able to get additional help with, the finances and purchasing more inventory. One company that I've worked with from the beginning is Working Solutions, the micro lending business based out of the Bay Area. Reconnected with them, and they sent me a bunch of grants to apply for, and I applied for them, and thankfully I was able to get the capital that I needed to purchase inventory again to fill my shop up. So that definitely helped during that time. And I think just that main focus of getting my website up, rebranding, and focusing on digital marketing definitely is what made me just kind of go through the pandemic. And in result, our online sales have been up. And there was a point too where our online sales were exceeding our in-store sales, which made me end up getting a warehouse just for our online sales alone. So it was really amazing to see that kind of growth within my business, and just how making those changes really impacted my business in a positive way.
Great. So I'm hearing some overlap here with Ricardo's story in terms of the importance of diversifying one's clientele, right? So Ricardo had to expand his client base from businesses to nonprofits, and it looks like you had to also think about how to expand from your foot traffic to this e-commerce space. Oftentimes it's important to not put all our eggs in one basket. And so you did see lots of businesses who primarily focused on one type of customer base to think about, if that line gets shut down, who then can you also turn to? Great. And Juan, tell us a little bit about some of the challenge that you experienced, and how did you go about navigating that?
So Crecer was launched, like I said, the middle of the pandemic. But like I mentioned earlier, we knew that post-pandemic, that a lot of our Latino small businesses were going to need that support. A lot of our small businesses were left out of the PPP loan process. A lot of times it had to be about relationships, right? If a small business had a relationship, Mercedes talked about, she had a previous relationship with Working Solutions, and she was able to go to them. A lot of our Latino small businesses did not have any relationships with these type of financial institutions or their local bank. They probably just bank, with their ATM. And so when the first round of the PPP came out, most of our small Latino businesses did not have the documentation in terms of their business or a relationship with a banker. And so I saw that a lot. And so I felt compelled to be able to say, look, we're going to come out of the pandemic. We need to have an institution within our county to be able to help and support those small businesses. So it was challenging, but we had a vision, and we have a vision to close the wealth gap in Sonoma County, and we want to be part of that solution. And so I think that even though it was difficult, we know that Crecer Capital is the future of Sonoma County to support the Latino small businesses.
Excellent. So let's carry the conversation there now in terms of being solution oriented, right? So we did hear about, working solutions as an organization that really fits in this idea of mutuality, right? Like we can't navigate this on our own. What are some other key resources that you have leveraged that you can impart with our audience today? And anybody feel free to jump in.
I could jump in. So I think that one of the things that I think what needs to happen is solution oriented is to really start consolidating those educational opportunities for our Latino small businesses. I think we have a lot of organizations really good doing some good work, economic development, small business development, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. But I think we've operated in a kind of siloed way. But I think going into the future, we need to really hone in and say, look, if some of the research is saying that home ownership is really now tied to your small business, what can we do to do that? What can we do to start talking about home ownership and creating those opportunities for our small businesses to be connected to that business development? And then obviously second is access to capital. We need to show people how to access capital. As Latinos, we notice sometimes we're debt adverse, right? We don't want to borrow money. And so we live in a society that this is how small businesses or businesses grow, is by accessing capital and using debt in order to grow their business. So a lot of education, a lot of coordination of the current resources, but we have to reimagine what that is, and we want to be a part of that.
Excellent. Thanks, Juan. Mercedes and Ricardo, we are coming up on time, so give us your final parting words of wisdom, either resources that you've leveraged or some other words of inspiration.
Yeah, for
We'll
me,
start with you, Mercedes.
yeah, so for me, like even reflecting back through the pandemic, I started to trace back to those connections I had within my community, and the Sonoma County Economic Development Board was one of those. So getting back in touch with them and, again, reaching out and seeing what kind of resources they had for small businesses like me during that time was very helpful. And I think for me too, being, a millennial owned business, I shared my knowledge with those that I had like on Instagram, with other followers that I had on Instagram, to spread awareness to maybe other small businesses who didn't have that connection like I did, or weren't aware of, these nonprofit organizations and all that. So I think, that's definitely played a huge role throughout the start of my business and through the pandemic. So I'm really grateful for them.
Ricardo, take us home.
Well, yes, and I really think that the Latino community has cultural wealth, and I really believe that, as Herman Hernandez says often, together we are stronger, or something in that line. But really, we need to collaborate more. We need to keep creating bridges. We need to work together. We need to invest in communities. We need to invest in Black, Indigenous, people of color, and really get stronger. I remember an Indigenous friend from Mexico that said, why the forest is so tall, those trees are so tall, it's because underneath, where nobody sees, they're together with their roots.
And with that, I want to thank Ricardo, Juan, and Mercedes for joining me today. Thanks for sharing your insights, and I hope that our audience will certainly do business with you and check out all the latest. So I will hand it over now to Oscar to take us home.
Thank you so much, Dr. Orozco. And I'll just wait for Ricardo to turn on my video. Great. Thank you again, Dr. Orozco, and to our panelists, Mercedes, Ricardo, and Juan. And what a great quote to end on, Ricardo, that we are better together. And I just, in closing, want to say that, we heard some very powerful data, but it is only data unless we make it actionable. So this is our call to action. Let's use the richness of the information that we heard today to drive long-term change in our community. We have it. We have available resources that will be coming online through various different state and federal funding sources. So this is our opportunity. And I also want to encourage us to join Herman Hernandez and Supervisor Hopkins in their call to action, to do everything in our personal power and our professional power to root out racism in Sonoma County, and to make sure that our BIPOC community feels welcome and that they enjoy every opportunity that the rest of our community enjoys. And let's make sure that we continue to drive and point the focus on building and growing the Human Development Index in our communities that today are living furthest away from opportunity. So with that, I want to again thank all of our presenters and thank our participants for joining us this evening. Again, to stay connected with the Portrait of Sonoma, you can go to portraitsoco@sonoma-county.org. And if you registered for this event, you'll also get an invitation to join us in crafting that agenda for action. So again, thank you and have a great evening. Goodbye.